Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network.
I think companies have the opportunity to wield their own pen, the power of their own voice. So we have this framework to decide when and where to engage. And these are never easy questions. They deserve to be grappled with. So what's really fun and intellectually challenging about my work for myself and others who do this is finding those solutions for companies to exist in the world in ways that feel really constructive.
That was Sally Susman, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Pfizer and the Vice Chair of the Pfizer Foundation. Sally leads engagement with all of Pfizer's external stakeholders, overseeing communications, corporate responsibility, global policy, government relations, investor relations, and patient advocacy. She has played similar roles at the Estée Lauder Companies and American Express. She has helped companies navigate through big events like 9/11, COVID, and the Russian-Ukrainian war. Through this extensive experience, Sally has honed an acute sense of how to navigate the delicate conversation that an organization must perpetually engage in with their stakeholders. And her work and expertise are more needed now than ever, with the growing interest among consumers, investors, and the global community in the companies that they support doing the right thing. Your corporation's success depends more now than perhaps ever in history on your ability to strategically approach the complex challenge of when to take a stand, what stand to take, and how to authentically communicate your corporate stance to the world. As heard in the highlighted clip, Sally has learned so much about this challenge. And in this episode, she shares with us some of her insights, such as the 5 questions leaders can ask to determine what discourses they will engage in with the public, especially in the modern era where the channel is never off. How an organization can work in a collaborative way with their leadership and corporate affairs team to craft a united message that reflects company values. The principles to mastering informal influence, getting others to be willing to adopt your ideas, as discussed in her most recent book, Breaking Through, Communicating to Open Minds, Move Hearts, and Change the World. Why communications is not a nice-to-have soft skill, but an essential capability that any leader, any strategist, any company must master. Ladies and gentlemen, Sally Susman. Sally, thank you so much for being here with us. It's an honor to have you on the podcast. I want to open with the same question I ask all of my guests. This is just to get us to know you a little personally. It may have nothing to do with your career or work or book. Could you complete the sentence for me? If you really know me, you know that.
I love to walk. I walk everywhere. I'm a New Yorker, so that maybe goes with the territory. But even this morning, I walked into our offices, and on the weekends, you'll find me covering a lot of ground. And it's a way not only to be healthy, but also to think through challenges I have in my mind. I find that the physicality of walking, especially if I'm able to get out into nature somehow, really helps me clear my mind, problem solve, and just feel hopeful about what's ahead.
Yes. Why is that? I mean, I know many leaders have a practice of walking. I think Steve Jobs would just walk to think and talk. Any idea what the psychological connection is there?
I don't, but I'm certain there is some sort of a physical, psychological connection that comes together. And some of the people I admire most, like one of my former bosses, Leonard Lauder of the Estée Lauder Companies, if he wants to get to know you, he takes you on a hike. Somehow defenses come down and ideas come in and hearts open up. It's a great practice.
Beautiful. This is a podcast on strategy, and I'm thinking your work incorporating strategy in so many different ways. There's communication strategy. There is a communication component of any strategy. There's stakeholder strategy. So my question for you, again, I ask everyone this, always get a different answer. What is your definition of strategy?
My definition of strategy is really the intersection of vision and execution. Recently at Pfizer, we did a really fantastic exercise and put our entire strategy on a single piece of paper. This was pretty radical for us because, we're a company that can make a thick deck. But lately, we've been on a simplification journey. And we recently created something called our purpose blueprint, which is our strategy on a single page. our purpose up top, an ambition, 5 principles, and 4 values. So this document to me really addresses your question about where does strategy live in all of that.
Wow. What are the other elements, do you think, of that form of strategy, that kind of communicating, aligning people to the strategy? Simple, concise, probably easy to remember. What are some of the other components, do you think, make an effective document like that?
Really bold thinking. For example, our purpose is breakthroughs that change patients' lives. And the next line under it is to touch 1 billion lives a year. These sort of moonshot ambitions, I think they rally an organization. We may not get there. We may not even get close. But if you don't aim high with your strategy, you run the risk of aiming low and hitting. I'd rather aim high and miss than aim low and hit. It's actually an Aristotle quote.
Yeah, I was going to Machiavelli. I had something similar to say about aiming above the target for the arrow to hit the target. So many other questions I could ask about that, but we have so much to cover with you in limited time. So you've worked with CEO of American Express, with CEO of Pfizer now, at the Lauder Companies, but you started your career in government. So I was wondering if you could tell us why you decided to shift to corporate.
Absolutely. When I was a kid, like most kids, I really wanted to do good in the world. And I thought I might have a career in government, maybe be the mayor of my hometown, St. Louis, Missouri, or a journalist. These are things I thought were noble professions. And so I started my career when I graduated from college on Capitol Hill, which was a wonderful experience. And I enjoyed it a tremendous amount and had a stint slightly later in government working for President Clinton in his administration. But all the time when I was working in government, I had a theory that I wanted to test. And what that was is that you could do an awful lot of good from a large public-facing company that sort of exists at the intersection of First and Main on some of the big issues of the day. And I have had the honor to work for 3 great companies and 9 chief executive officers over those companies, reporting to 6 directly. And so I've had the opportunity to work really closely with chief executives in the C-suite and see the impact that these companies have, which is really big.
And it seems like you had this theory at a time before today where I think that the expectations of corporations to channel their impact, is recognized, it's understood, even investors are looking for it, certainly employees are looking for it. Has there been a shift? And why has there been a shift, if there has been?
There has been a shift, and there are many reasons for it, but I want to highlight 2 that I think were pretty seismic. They happened in the mid-1980s. It actually goes back about 40 years when the shift began. And the first was a real stakeholder mindset among people. I saw it first with the HIV/AIDS community. People who were suffering with that illness were making demands upon companies, pharmaceutical companies, governments. And then I noticed so too were the breast cancer survivors, and so too were the climate activists and the union folks. All kinds of patient groups and stakeholder groups. They really felt they had a voice and they should be a part of the decision-making of big companies. That happened at the same time that social and digital communication became very much a part of our world. This allowed those activists to organize and communicate and disseminate their views almost for free, really, cheaply and easily. So this, I believe, was a good thing, but it meant that the fortresses of institutions, companies, governments could no longer exist at a distance. They had to engage. It's funny when you think about something like an annual report, which is a very common tool that companies have. The purpose was to tell the investors at the end of each year, how had the company done? Now, of course, people know that it updates every 15 seconds. We used to have a lot of press conferences in companies to tell our news. Companies don't have press conferences anymore because they're running a news cycle and talking to the media 24/7. So these forces of stakeholder activism and the technology of social digital came together to change the expectations of how institutions would engage with the public.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's almost as if the corporate brand has become more important. Say, 30 years ago, a company could hide behind product brands and people related to the product brand. But I think there's certainly a much greater awareness of who's the company actually behind the brand that you're doing business with. So you have managed some really high stakes, fast moving moments, right? You've experienced what's the response of American Express to 9/11, of Pfizer to COVID to the war in Ukraine, right? You have this collision of factors where you have to make rapid decisions. I know this is what your whole book is about, but what can you tell us? What are some suggestions you can share from that experience?
Managing these kind of high stakes situations is what makes my job so interesting and why I love it. And the only question I really can never answer is tell me what an average day is like, because I've never had an average day. We have a framework here at Pfizer that I developed to help guide us as to when and where we want to engage in public questions. It's 5 questions. The first is, does the issue relate to our purpose? And again, Pfizer's purpose is breakthroughs that change patients' lives, which means we shouldn't speak out on everything, because if you do, you lose your agency if you're always out there talking. Secondly, how does the issue, whatever it is, relate to our stakeholders? And for Pfizer, and I think most big companies, the primary stakeholder is usually the colleagues. How do colleagues feel about this issue?
Which some companies would call employees, just to make sure I understand definitionally.
Yes. And then the third is, how does it relate to our values? And I'm very specifically here not saying to our politics, because companies, in my view, should not be political, but must be value-driven. So we have 4 values: courage, excellence, equity, and joy. And so we think about it through that lens. The fourth question is, what are our options should we choose to engage? Because I don't like to be reactive. And so often I find myself, a journalist has called and said, I've been working on this issue for 10 months and you now have 10 minutes to answer my question. I reject that. Or somebody's pushing a petition in your face and saying, all the other companies have signed. Why won't you? Again, I reject that. I think companies have the opportunity to wield their own pen, the power of their own voice. And my favorite vehicle is the letter to employees, then posted on a website. So you speak your mind how you want to speak it. And then the fifth and final question is, what is the price of our silence? Because there's some issues, whether it's a racial injustice or violence in the schools, that just silence would be deafening. So we have this framework to decide when and where to engage. And these are never easy questions. They deserve to be grappled with. If I could just take 2 minutes, I'd love to tell you about what we did in Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. It's great. Thank you.
So, a year ago, last February, Russia invades Ukraine and many top companies pulled out very visibly, to much public accolade for that decision. For those of us in the medicine business, we have a historic humanitarian exemption that we should continue to provide medicine, because a kid in Russia with cancer is just a kid with cancer and deserves whatever help and hope he can be provided. So after much thought, we said, yes, we will continue to provide medicine, but it didn't feel right to just end the conversation there. So we had to think more deeply. Our CEO encouraged us to roll up our sleeves and find a more nuanced response. So yes, we provided the medicine, but every penny we earned and have continued to earn in Russia has been donated directly to Ukrainian relief causes, so that we can't be seen as, it's business as usual for them, or worse, they're profiting during this time. So what's really fun and intellectually challenging about my work, for myself and others who do this, is finding those solutions for companies to exist in the world in ways that feel really constructive.
That's brilliant. This is not a question that we planned for. When you developed these 5 questions for Pfizer, for example, or the response, right? You're describing it as a company, which I kind of imagine you or the CEO or the two of you writing it down, but I would think it has to be a more collaborative effort. Can you walk us through, how do you think about who does the work to create the communication so that it's coming from authority?
This is a great question, and we have a wonderfully diverse and robust executive committee here at Pfizer that I have the honor to sit on. And sometimes the message needs to come from a scientist, for example. So we might engage Michael Dolston, Pfizer's chief scientific officer, to address a particular point, or the head of manufacturing, if the question relates maybe to quality or production levels. I do believe that communications is a team sport. Of course, there are many occasions that call for the chief executive, but I also think it's incumbent on other C-suite leaders to be willing to speak up and speak out. It's really why I wrote my book, because, I've been a behind-the-scenes player my whole life, supporting others in being the public face of causes and efforts and campaigns. I now felt that things I have been thinking about and these ideas that we're discussing that I've been honing for decades crystallized for me in my work in the pandemic. And so that's why I wrote Breaking Through and being more public myself in talking about these beliefs and principles.
Beautiful. So then if you don't mind, if we talk more about your motivation for this career and this work, you write in chapter 2 of your book about a personal moment of courage and candor. I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Kayan, for asking me about it. I really appreciate it. So each chapter is a simple principle. Sounds simple. They don't always play out so simply. But chapter 2 is about having the courage for candor. And for me, I learned this lesson in my early 20s. It was, again, the mid-'80s, in the 1980s. And I was just starting my career and realizing as I was entering my young adult years that I am gay. It sounds like not such a big revelation now, but if we go back 40 years, again, in the middle of the AIDS crisis, before we had people like Ellen DeGeneres out in the world, it was still a very difficult circumstance for me, and many people I knew chose to live in the closet. But I went home to St. Louis because I felt I needed to tell my parents. We were a close family, and much of what I do today, I learned from them. I knew it would be a difficult decision and a difficult discussion. I just didn't know how difficult, and it was tough. I gave them the preamble, how much I love them, how much they mean to me, and explained that I was gay. My mom was mad. My dad was sad. He cried. This is a man I admire greatly. He said through his tears, "You'll never have a spouse, a child, or a career." And those words, they hurt me, though it wasn't his intention to hurt me. He was just expressing his parental fears and what he believed to be the reality at his time. In that moment, when I didn't know where my fate would go with my family, my life plan crystallized. And I knew that these were the 3 things I had to have. And I'm so happy to tell you that my wife and I have been together for 35 years. We have an accomplished and bold daughter who's 29. And I'm really proud of the work that I do. And the best part is I have a wonderful restored relationship with my parents, and they are among my greatest supporters and fans. But the point for your listeners is that courage for candor is worth it. And you may suffer some short or even midterm pain, but you'll be rewarded with long-term gains in pride and peace and authentic relationships. And so I wanted to say to your listeners, if there's something you need to say, there's something stuck in your throat or in your draft outbox, say it, send it, you will be better for it.
Yeah, I can see the pattern of your career resonating, right? You're talking also about a corporation that needs to say something. Fascinating. We're reaching the top of our time with you, so I wanted to hit a few specific questions. Is there something that you've changed your mind about?
Absolutely. And I hope we'll be always open to having our minds changed as people. For me, I was hardcore against work from home. I was one of those, you got to be in the office. We got to have our sleeves rolled up around the table with our business peers, showing our value, showing how much we care. And then during the pandemic, when I worked from home for about 2 years, I really saw that a hybrid work environment can work, that flexibility properly managed can really help a lot of people. I still like to come to the office, and I'm in the office now 3 days a week at least, but I have newfound respect for the ability to work flexibly and remotely.
Yeah, I think that COVID forced us to reconsider things that we weren't really able to consider. And on the other side of that, we said, maybe it's not as I thought it was. So you have a lot of experience with, maybe use the term informal influence. A lot of our listeners do, right? Like they don't necessarily control the budget, but they're whispering in the person's ear who is influencing the budget. And you write about communication. Any advice for being effective at using communication for informal influence?
I've thought a lot about this. Okay. It's a great question. And many people don't have formal lines of authority, and being able to navigate a matrix is more and more important in whatever you do. In the 10 principles of the book, I really hope that readers will cherry pick those that work for them, because there isn't a singular style that works, but it's about having your own effective style. And some of the ideas I put forward are, for example, to be curious. It helps sometimes when you open a conversation, as you do, with questions. You get people talking and they'll share what's on their mind, which will help you have influence with them. Or to use humor. And I know it can be a bit dicey sometimes in our world to use humor. Humor was the hardest chapter in the book for me to write, but I stuck with it because sometimes just lightening the mood, having a shared chuckle over something can go a really long way in diffusing tension and helping you to be influential. So I encourage people to look through the 10 principles and pick out a couple that feel natural to them and then employ them regularly as a way to really connect with people, which will ultimately help you to open those minds and move those hearts.
Beautiful. I think that brings us to where we unfortunately have to end here. People should buy the book, read through the 10 principles. I've also found a lot of great material of you on YouTube and podcasts where you get to share and we get to learn more. Any other advice for people that want to continue learning from you and staying connected with you?
Sure. First, I hope they will stay connected with me. I am very active on LinkedIn. I find it a great place to have a good civil discourse about some of these topics. I also am on sallysusman.com if you want to talk to me there. And my one piece of parting advice is remember that communications is not a soft skill or an afterthought, but it's a rock hard competency as essential to leadership as any other discipline.
Awesome. Well, thank you for presenting that to us because, as you say, communication is so often considered a soft skill. Nice to have. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for sharing it with us. And it was such a pleasure talking to you, Sally.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Ness, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kai-Han Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.